Hello and welcome everyone to our webinar, Flood After Fire. We're going to get started very shortly. Thank you, Cheryl. Appreciate your positive feedback and you being excited to be here. All right, looks like we have everyone logged in. So we'll go ahead and get started. So hello and welcome everyone to our Flood After Fire webinar. This informative event is hosted tonight by FEMA Region 8, the Colorado Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management, and the Colorado Water Conservation Board. Now, as Coloradans, we are no stranger to floods or fire. In 2020, Colorado experienced an unprecedented wildfire season. The East Troublesome Fire, and along with the Cameron Peak wildfire, scorched over 400,000 acres and destroyed over 1,000 structures, including nearly 600 residences. Consequently, flood risk after a wildfire increases dramatically, and where it rains, it can flood. So while Colorado is still recovering from these historic events, it's important to understand the increased risk and prepare for the upcoming wildfire season. We are hosting tonight's Flood After Fire webinar virtually on Zoom. And I know that we've all probably been in plenty of virtual gatherings over the last year, but I wanted to highlight a couple of housekeeping items. First, for the benefit of everyone's audio experience, we have muted all participants' lines. We do have American Sign Language interpreters helping us as well. And you have the option to do closed captioning as well. We'll be covering a lot of interesting and useful material throughout the presentations tonight. And you might have a question. If you do have a question for the panelists regarding the content of the presentation, please type your question in the Q&A question and answer box. If applicable, please indicate which panelist or topic your question addresses. Please keep in mind, whatever you do type in the Q&A box will be viewable to the entire group. We will have a question and answer session after the presentations as time allows. To be respectful of everyone's time, we will answer the questions in the order they are received and however many we can address within the hour. So if you do have questions beyond the content presented, or perhaps a more specific topic or individual circumstance, we urge you to send an email to FEMA-R8-HMhelp@fema.dhs.gov. And don't worry, I will put that email address that you can send a question to in the chat box shortly. We will be recording this session and posting it online and making it available to everyone who registered. We will also follow up with an email in the next couple of days with the presentation slides, resources, and the presenter's contact information. So speaking of presenters, we have three excellent panelists for you tonight. Representing FEMA Region 8, we have Tracy Harrison and Peter Reinhardt. And with the Colorado Water Conservation Board and your Colorado National Flood Insurance Program Coordinator, we have Doug Mahan. So Tracy, Peter, and Doug, I'll let you guys introduce yourselves and we can start the presentation.
So thanks, Sam. Good evening. My name is Tracy Harrison, and I am a mitigation specialist with FEMA, located here in Denver. I specialize in flood after fire risk and education and outreach, and I have a background in insurance and emergency management. I just want to say thank you for joining us tonight.
Good evening. My name is Peter Reinhardt, and I work with Tracy in the floodplain management insurance branch here in FEMA Region 8. And as with Tracy, I focus on flood after fire. And my background is I've been working in the floodplain management field for over 15 years, both in the private and public sector. And I want to thank you all for attending tonight as well. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Doug Mahan. I'm with the Department of Natural Resources here in Colorado. I work directly for the Colorado Water Conservation Board. And as Sam mentioned, I am the National Flood Insurance Program Community Assistance Coordinator for the state. Thank you all for joining us tonight.
Thank you, guys. And we will go ahead and start the presentation.
Thanks, Sam. So we'll go on the next slide. Thank you. So let's get started. As the slide says, basically with wildfire comes an increased risk of flooding after fire. Next slide, thank you. So this presentation is going to touch on the change of the flood risk due to a wildfire, how to best protect yourself, your family, and your property from the increased risk in flooding following a wildfire, and the importance of having flood insurance. So wildfires are a disaster that's been in the news a lot this past year, but the flooding after a fire is something that isn't always on the minds of people living near a burn scar and is often overlooked. So large-scale wildfires can dramatically alter the landscape, and they create conditions that can increase the risk for post-wildfire flooding, both downstream and downslope of burn scars, particularly in areas that are not traditionally prone to flooding. So normally the vegetation absorbs rainwater, it reduces runoff. However, the wildfire leaves the ground charred and unable to absorb this water. Therefore, it creates conditions ideal for flash flooding. And these flooding events are generally more severe as it takes far less rain to produce a flash flood or a mud flow on these burn areas. So it's important to understand that these flood risks, excuse me, will remain significantly higher until vegetation is restored and the watershed is stabilized. So many people believe that they're not located near a stream or a body of water, that there's not a flood risk from flooding. But you do not have to live in a high-risk flood area to suffer flood damage. Around 20% of flood insurance claims occur in moderate to low-risk areas. So with significant changes to the landscape due to the wildfire, these burn scar areas are highly susceptible to flash flooding from just minor rainstorms and are known to roll down boulders, tear out trees, and destroy buildings and bridges. It's sometimes difficult for people to visualize what a mudflow is, but a mudflow are rivers of liquid and flowing mud on a surface of normally dry land. It's often caused by a combination of vegetation loss and heavy rains. And we're going to show you a video on our next slide that will kind of depict a mudflow for you. So mudflows have been described as having a consistency of milkshakes. The mudflow differs from other earth movements where there's not a flowing characteristics such as a landslide, slope failure, or mudslides. So mudslides are debris flows of rock and mud and dirt that is thicker than a mudflow. Mudslides have been compared to have the consistency of cake. Both the flash flooding and mudflows are covered by the NFIP, which is the National Flood Insurance Program, flood insurance policies. Landslides and mudslides are not covered by the NFIP. So now I'm going to turn the time over to Peter Reinhardt.
Thank you, Tracy. After and even prior to a wildfire being fully contained, there's going to be an increased risk of flooding both downslope and downstream of a burn scar. And the time to start preparing and protecting is now. Next slide, please. People need to know about the increased risk of flooding following a wildfire. The U.S. Forest Service, along with the U.S. Geological Survey, collected data from both the East Troublesome and Cameron Peak fires, And that data was used to compile what's called a burn area emergency response report, or what it's generally referred to as a BEAR report. These reports can show the potential likelihood of flooding and debris flows based on specific design rainfall events. If you're interested, the reports for both the East Troublesome and Cameron Peak wildfires can be viewed online, or your local county emergency manager may also have the reports available in their office for people to review. And just to be aware, BEAR reports aren't completed for every wildfire. So a general rule of thumb for people to understand is that if you can look up slope and see the burn area from where you are, then you're at risk for flooding. Now, you're not going to have time to start gathering things when a natural disaster is fast approaching. So an important step in protecting yourself and your family is to put together a to-go kit long before a wildfire or other disaster occurs, and keep that easily accessible so you can take it with you when you have to quickly evacuate. Each person in a household should have a readily accessible to-go kit with their specific needs, and backpacks work great for storing items and are quick to grab. And you need to plan to be away from your home for an extended period of time, so make sure you have everything you need, such as food and water, as well as important documents and medicine. People need to know what to do and where to go, and have an evacuation plan in place, and make sure that all family members are familiar with it. Ideally, you'll have at least 2 different evacuation routes in case one is blocked. If you do run into roads that are inundated with water during evacuation, don't try and drive through the water. The National Weather Service Turn Around, Don't Drown campaign warns people of the hazards of driving or walking through floodwaters. If you're unsure of your risks or have questions about evacuation routes, contact your local emergency manager. They're the ones that will be most knowledgeable about the risks in your specific area and are a great resource. With the increased risk of flooding after wildfire, you need to stay informed, and there are a number of ways you can do that. You can attend local emergency management community meetings, and you'll need to be aware of threatening weather, so be sure to sign up for local emergency weather alerts, either through the National Weather Service or contact your local emergency manager to find out if they have a specific alert service for the area. And be alert of any precipitation that develops in your area and take any necessary action. Don't wait to receive an emergency warning. And most of all, it's not just about having a plan in place in case of a disaster, but you need to practice your plan, including evacuation routes with your family. So if or when something happens, you'll be well prepared. Next slide, please. We can't say enough that people need to understand the increased risk of flooding in these burn scar areas and the importance of protecting yourself and your family. But you also need to think about protecting your investments, including your house. The time to review your insurance policies for your home is now, not after you've been flooded. Many people assume that because they have a homeowners and renters insurance policy, that they are protected from flooding. However, generally, homeowners policies do not cover flood damage. The best way for people to protect themselves financially from post-wildfire flooding is to purchase flood insurance. Along with purchasing a flood insurance policy, take an inventory of your personal property within your home by documenting items in videos or pictures, and be sure to move more valuable or irreplaceable items to the higher floors. And if you can, prepare your home ahead of time for potential flooding. Some things you can do include anchoring fuel tanks, installing a sump pump with backup power, and install drain plugs and backflow valves to prevent floodwaters from entering drains and into your house. Now I'll pass it on to Doug to talk about flood insurance.
Thank you, Peter. So tonight I'd like to talk a little more about flood insurance that Peter touched on. And as the title card mentions, where it rains, it can flood. So just 1 inch of water can cause $25,000 of flood damage to your home. And the fastest way to recover from a flood event, financially, physically, and even emotionally, is to have flood insurance. When people think about determining whether or not they are at risk from flooding, they turn to the flood insurance rate maps. These maps depict the different risks of flooding based on the 1% annual chance of flood. The 1% annual chance of flood is also known as the 100-year flood. Typically, the areas of flooding after fire will consist of overland flows from the burn scar and will not be replicated or duplicated on the FEMA flood insurance rate maps. These are temporary conditions of increased risk due to the wildfire, and FEMA does not map these temporary conditions. Because the maps are not updated to show the potential flood risk due to the burn scars, a good rule of thumb is that if you can look up slope and see the burned area from where you are, then you are at risk of flooding. It is important to note that NFIP, that is the National Flood Insurance Program, flood insurance is available to all residents in communities that participate, not just for those that have property in an identified regulatory flood hazard area. And as Tracy mentioned, upwards of 20% of all flood insurance claims are for structures outside of the mapped regulatory flood hazard areas. Additionally, unlike private flood insurance, NFIP policies cannot be canceled by the insurance carrier. Next slide, please. Homeowners insurance covers both personal property and the dwelling under one policy with one deductible. Flood insurance, on the other hand, generally covers just the dwelling and does not include personal property contents. However, the National Flood Insurance Program policy gives the policy owner the option of including contents for personal property as a separate coverage with 2 deductibles. Replacement cost is available for primary single-family homes with the policy building coverage limits equal to 80% or more of the full replacement cost of the home. NFIP flooded policy personal property and other occupancies are paid on an actual cash value less depreciated cost. Under some homeowners policies, foundation coverage may be excluded. Under the NFIP flood policy, building coverage pays for permanent items such as plumbing and electrical systems, HVAC systems, water heaters, refrigerators, stoves and built-in dishwashers, permanently installed paneling, wallboard, bookcases, cabinets, and debris removal. Some items that are often located in basements, such as a furnace, hot water heater, and circuit breaker, are also covered. Other items that may be in a basement may not be covered. It is important to read your policy for these exclusions. Most homeowners policy exclude flooding and mud flows. The NFIP policy is designed as a supplemental insurance policy to cover this gap in homeowners policy to cover for both flooding and mud flows. We'll go to the next slide, please. Some key differences between homeowners and flood insurance policies. There are coverages on your standard homeowners policy that are specifically excluded in an NFIP policy. Examples of some exclusions include property outside of building, such as swimming pools, hot tubs, decks, patios, fences, and walkways, as well as septic systems. Landscaping, driveways, sidewalks, and retaining walls are also not covered. Also excluded are payments for living expenses, such as temporary housing and financial losses caused by business interruption or the loss of an insured property. Damage that could have been avoided, this includes moisture, mildew, or mold resulting either from a pre-existing condition or from a lack of timely remediation, are also excluded. You'll need to read your policy so that you know what is and is not covered. It should be noted that there's a 30-day waiting period from the date of purchase to the time an NFIP flood policy becomes effective. You may have heard of a wildfire exception to this rule. This rule states that if a property is impacted by flooding on a burned federal land and the insurance was purchased within 60 days of the wildfire containment date, then the 30-day waiting period may be accepted. As the East Troublesome Fire was declared contained on November 30th and the Cameron Peak Fire on December 2nd, we are well past the 30-day mark for these exceptions to be relevant. In addition, exceptions are assessed at the time of the claim and are not automatic. For those that may be at risk and do not yet have flood insurance, now is the time to speak to your insurance agent. Next slide, please. Congress limits the amount of coverage in the NFIP depending on the occupancy of the building. There are different levels of maximum coverage for both building and contents. There are also a separate deductible for building and contents. The higher the deductible, the lower the premium. Homeowners and commercial property owners should generally elect to secure both building and contents coverage, while renters elect to only purchase contents coverage. If the NFIP's maximum limits are not adequate for your property, private flood insurance is likely the better option. When shopping for flood insurance, remember that many policies also have individual limits on items within a specific category. Next slide, please. Flood insurance coverage is not only available for existing structures, but is also available for buildings under the course of construction and prior to being walled and roofed. In order to be eligible for insurance coverage during construction, work must remain in progress. If construction does stop at any time, it may only be for a period not to exceed 90 continuous days, thereafter the policy to remain in effect. In addition, materials and supplies that are being used for construction will only be covered by the policy while these items are stored in a fully enclosed building at the insured location or an adjacent property. A special consideration for insurance coverage while under construction is that at the time of loss, the deductible amount will be 2 times the deductible that would otherwise apply to a completed building. For more information on building under the course of construction, we suggest you review the NFIP, the flood insurance coverage policy, or contact your insurance company or agent. This contingent of insurance while your home is being constructed may be particularly important to those who may have lost their home in the wildfires. The course of construction insurance policy will protect your investment as you rebuild should a flood event occur. Remember, prior to starting any construction, it is important to consult your local building department and floodplain administrator to ensure you follow all local, state, and federal regulations. And we'll go to the next slide, and I'll hand it back to Sam.
Thanks so much, Doug. All right. Want to look to see if we have any questions. I'm not seeing any right now in the question and answer function. We did have a couple come through. We've got a couple coming through the question and answer session, but I know we had a couple of questions come through in the chat and want to address those. Let's see, Steve asked, are Bear GIS data published online? It would be useful to use those data layers in maps rather than relying on PDFs.
I can take that question, Sam. Bear reports, as I mentioned earlier, aren't done for every wildfire. So depending on what wildfire you're looking for, that information may not be available online. But generally, it's the U.S. Forest Service that does these reports. So if you Google the U.S. Forest Service GIS data, Bear GIS data, you should be able to find information online. If not, feel free to reach out to me and I can help you find that information.
And I was muted. Thanks so much, Peter. Let's see, I think we had one more in the chat. I do know that Cheryl asked about sharing this information, and just want to let everyone know that yes, you can share all this information. We will follow up the webinar with an email to anyone who registered, and that email will contain links to the live or the recording here, as well as the slides and some of the resources that we're going to be sharing as well. So please share the information with anyone that you think might be interested or could benefit. Yes, and Cheryl asked in the chat, are there updated flood maps available that reflect the land changes from population growth? So that's a great question. Doug, did you want to take that one about flood maps?
Yes, Sam, I'm happy to answer that question for Cheryl. Flood maps are updated periodically. They aren't updated based solely on population changes to an area. So the maps are updated in cooperation with the state and the community that's affected. And a lot of different factors go into determining when a map would be updated. One of them is the age of the current map. Like you stated, the population growth, any changes to the waterways over time. So all of these factor into when a map will be updated and what priority the maps would be updated. So I can't say for any particular map if it has been updated recently due to the population growth.
Thanks so much, Doug. Appreciate it. All right, moving on to the Q&A box. Michael asked, do insurance companies often modify the floodplain status of a property after a fire? This could inhibit the ability to sell a property after a fire upslope. So who wants
Tracy,
to
go
take
ahead.
that one?
For the NFIP, no, they do not actually look at that risk. As we mentioned, the mapping, when the mapping changes, there are temporary risks that are not mapped. So it would not impact what you would be considering insurance rates. It won't put you in a higher risk due to the burn scar. That's for the NFIP policies, which we kind of specialize in. You would want to check if you end up going with a private insurance market. You might want to ask that question to the insurance agent, but chances are no, just because they're very rarely mapped to begin with. As Peter mentioned, not all wildfires get a bear report, which goes in and maps those risks. So it's a great question, but it will not impact your premiums.
Thanks so much, Tracy. This next question comes from Stephanie. And Stephanie asks, this one's probably for Doug. Stephanie asks, do you think enough people in Colorado who live near where fires could break out know to get flood insurance, not just homeowners insurance? If not, is there an effort to educate more people?
There is an effort to educate more people. This webinar is part of that effort. Do I think enough people in Colorado know that flood insurance is separate from their homeowners insurance, and they should be looking at flood insurance? No, I think there's always room for improvement. So through this webinar series, through our efforts with the disaster relief team and disaster recovery communication and outreach team, we are providing information to the impacted communities through local staff, as well as media and posters in commercial and private entities around the communities. So there's always room for improvement. I would ask that everybody attending this webinar tonight, please tell your friends. Like Sam said, this webinar will be available online for anybody to watch after tonight. And if they have any questions, please contact the resources that are being provided, as well as contact your local community floodplain administrators and emergency managers.
Thanks so much, Doug. Also, I wanted to add in the spirit of sharing more information, we will be having another webinar tomorrow at 5:30. This one's a little bit different. It's wildfire preparation and recovery. So not so focused on flood after fire, but there will be some flood after fire information. But if that's something you would like to attend, I will make sure to put the link in the chat so you can sign up the same way you signed up and registered for this webinar. All right, next question. We have a couple of them coming in. This one's from Michael, and it has to do with mitigation efforts and mudslides. So I think Tracy chatted on that, but the question is, are there mitigation efforts that can be made to improve the flood mudslide resiliency of a town before there's a fire upslope from the town?
There is. The federal side, federal forest side, they are doing things like reseeding. They're also doing things like mulching. So there can also be dams, temporary dams that they can put in areas where they find that there might be more of a debris flow. Communities can look at mitigation grants that are available if they find that they need to do some type of debris basins. It is a very large group of community that is helping. The best source that you can get some information on what projects might be going on in your area, I would say, is to contact your local emergency manager. They will be better able to inform you of projects that are in the works or in process of being developed for those mitigation measures that they're going to be taking.
Thanks so much, Tracy. And just to let everyone know, I did put the registration link in the chat for tomorrow's evening webinar on wildfire preparation and recovery. It will be similar to this one in format, but have a little bit different subject matter. Next question, we've got one from Nolan, and this is a great question. Nolan asks, is there a good checklist for to-go bags for emergencies? Where could folks find out information about what to put in their to-go bags?
Since I touched on this in the presentation, I'll take this question. We do have a website, ready.gov, that gives you an idea of suggested things that you would need during disaster and gives you an idea of what to include. Again, as I mentioned, necessities, food, water, important documents, and medication. But it kind of goes through giving you suggestions and what you should put in these to-go kits. So again, that's ready.gov, and you can just go to that website and look up to-go kits, and she'd provide you with some information.
Awesome, thanks, Peter, appreciate that. And ready.gov is a wealth of resources and information for lots of different disasters. Next question, can we link this presentation through a county webpage? Once we send out all the resources, you are free to share those resources. So we would love for folks to share this recording or the resources or the slides that we're going to be sharing. Let's see, next question, Judy. This is a pretty specific question, and it might be for Doug with the NFIP. And I don't know, Doug, if you know if Grand County is part of the NFIP. Off the top of your head, I know different communities and different counties can opt in to be part of the National Flood Insurance Program.
Sure. Judy, thank you very much for your question. Currently, Grand County is not a participating community with the NFIP, but their Board of Commissioners is actively pursuing participation and joining. They've had one commissioners meeting where they have voted to join. Right now, they're just going through the process to get all of their regulations adopted and approved by FEMA. And I believe they're holding a vote on the regulations on April 27th. And then they will be submitting their approved regulation resolution to FEMA along with their application. And it should be only a few days following that, if everything is in order, for them to be recognized as a participating community in the National Flood Insurance Program. So we hope to have them in the fold here very soon. Thank you, Judy, for your question.
Awesome, thanks, Doug. Let's see, next question. Charlotte, she says, thank you for having a fully accessible presentation. our county OEM presentations related to the Cal Wildfire recovery have had similar preparedness information, but not with this level of accessibility and not with NFIP details. So thank you so much, Charlotte, for those that comment and feedback. We're always trying to be more accessible and more informative to stakeholders. Let's see, this one is a comment from an anonymous attendee about mold and mildew and the serious problem that those can have with adverse health effects to humans and animals. And the comment saying, do not delay on mitigation efforts. I think we all can agree that mitigation efforts are a great way to secure things in the future and to be prepared and resilient. All right, let's see. Next question from Cheryl. During the Cameron Peak fire, I understand that an entire zip code 80537 and part of 80538 were deemed uninsurable for the period of time. Lack of area knowledge might have had a temporary effect in this case, but it seemed odd to have a whole zip code redline. Is this likely a private insurance issue or a FEMA? Would it come from FEMA?
I'll take this one. So it's a good question, Cheryl. I'm just going to maybe make a little bit of a question clarification. I'm assuming that maybe when you said that they were uninsurable, it was wildfire insurance and not flood insurance. These things happen in an insurance industry where people that maybe have not had insurance on a home and now wildfire is pending, they now hurry and want to get insurance. And unfortunately, insurance companies will look at that and probably put some type of memorandum saying, no, there's a wait. They do the same thing with earthquake. If there's been an earthquake, there's usually like a 30-day waiting period if you're near an epicenter, that they will not all of a sudden sell earthquake insurance. It's not something that FEMA has done. It's probably private industry. There would not be anything like that for NFIP flood insurance policies because we have the 30-day waiting period. So we don't block out entire zip codes. We just say there's a 30-day waiting period. And that's kind of goes the same way if something's coming down with a hurricane and people all of a sudden want to get flood insurance. That's why that 30-day waiting period is there. They are not, an insurance company is not picking up those risks right away. So I hope that kind of answers your question. If not, you want to put more in the chat or reach out to us personally, I'd be happy to answer some more insurance questions on that.
Thanks so much, Tracy. And yes, we will have the contact information for our presenters at the end of this presentation and part of the slides. So if you do have a more specific question to your own circumstances or your own community, and it's a little bit more specific, feel free to reach out to them that way. Also, feel free to send an email to the email address that was put in the chat, and I'll make sure to put it in there as well for general inquiries. All right, let's see. Next question from Charla. Are there any types of insurance that will cover landslides or mudslides since the NFIP will not cover this type of damage?
I would love to take this one. This was an excellent question to bring up. So thank you for asking it. First of all, there are very specific definitions for a landslide versus, let's say, that mud flow or a mudslide. And to be honest, mudslide is a term that is not really a scientific term. It's kind of more, they say kind of more of a layman's term that comes out a lot. So what we really want to focus on is what's going to happen with these burn scar areas. We're looking at mud flows are going to be happening. This is because there's going to be an intense rain event where the water cannot absorb. And so it's going to be a flowing mass of mud and debris. That's covered by the NFIP. A landslide is where, let's say, a slope overhang of rock and material, is saturated over a longer period of time, and that dirt will slough off and crumble down the mountain slide. So it's not a mass of liquid moving, which is a mud flow, dirt. Landslide is more of a crumbling mass because it's falling off the slope. The slope can't handle it, and it's pulled down by gravity. And so that is not covered under the NFIP. We don't see that that's going to be happening as much in these burn scar areas where we traditionally are going to be seeing mud flow on the conditions of the burn scars. So I hope that helps a little bit. That's why we're promoting the NFIP, is it's going to cover for the mud flows and for flash flooding events. If you are interested in landslide insurance coverage specifically, there are actual third-party markets, just like the supplemental markets, that do cover for landslides.
Thanks so much, Tracy. Appreciate that answer and clarification. Let's see, the next one we have is from Allison. And Allison asks, are any special planning efforts occurring with county road departments and FEMA, anticipating flooding washing out our rural roads in the mountains along braided streams? Any special planning efforts with county road departments and FEMA?
I can try and take this a little bit. First of all, these would be mitigation efforts. So this would be something you'd probably want to talk to the emergency management or manager with in the county. They are in the process of developing projects like this, going in and looking at culvert sizes, and do they need to increase the culvert size, and how can they shore up areas that might have some erosion for roads. They will be putting things together, and then they will be submitting those for funding. FEMA does the funding portion of the project. So your community is the one that's going to put the project together, say where they need it and what they need and how they need to do it. And then they submit that for FEMA for funding. And the other webinar that we were promoting might have a little bit more of this information when it comes to recovery mitigation that's happening. They'll have a lot of other subject matter experts, so I'd recommend getting on and watching that one. But if you don't have a chance to do that, reach out to your emergency manager. They can help you with that question.
Thanks so much, Tracy. The webinar that we did mention is available in the chat. The next webinar, Wildfire Preparation and Recovery, and that's happening at 5:30 Mountain Standard Time, Wednesday, April 21st, and the link is in the chat to register for that. All righty. I'm trying to see if there's any more questions in the chat or in the question and answer box. And I think we got to all of them.
I have a little one that I hear quite frequently, and I didn't hear it this time. We have been on a few of the webinars, and we have heard from community members that they have gone to their insurance agent and asked them if they will or can sell a flood insurance policy. If your agent is not able to help you with that, if they say something like they are not a carrier for the flood insurance, you can go on the website. We're going to give you some information. You can go onto the website that we're going to offer, which is floodsmart.gov. You can look up for an agent. You put in Colorado, it'll pull up a list of agents and insurance companies that will sell the flood insurance. So if your agent isn't able to help you, you can go to that second resource and be able to get some additional information with an agent that does sell flood insurance.
Always good to hear those frequently asked questions. So appreciate that, Tracy. All right, I am not seeing any more questions, so I think we can move on to some of the resources. And these are all resources that are listed and will be shared. I don't know if some of the panelists want to highlight some of these that have been really good for folks in the public to use to get more information and to be more informed.
Hi, this is Doug, and I will emphasize the very first bullet point on this resource page. This is the Colorado Water Conservation Board website. We have a lot of information about flood after fire on the website, including fact sheets. We hope to post links to these webinars as well. It's also a good direct way to contact me should you have any questions that are specific to your property or specific to your community. So please don't hesitate, go to cwcbcolorado.gov, and we're happy to provide all this information.
I would like to just get a shout out for Colorado for there's two websites that are on here. There's the mars.colorado.gov flood after fire. That is specific information that your state, that Colorado has put together. They have pulled a lot of resources from a lot of different agencies in both their websites that are available. And they might have some of the information you're looking at for evacuation routes. They might have some information about mitigation plans in the area. Both of them have been very well done. And I know they have concentrated on trying to provide the best information for the community on both those websites.
And I know the other two that are listed on there, I've used before, floodsmart.gov. That is anything and everything you want to find out about the National Flood Insurance Program. Also, the ready.gov site, it's all kinds of disasters that you can be ready for, and all kinds of resources. For example, we mentioned the to-go kit. That's a great resource for folks to look into in many types of disasters, much more than fire and flood. All right, so next, here are the contacts for our amazing presenters today. Thank you so much, Doug, Tracy, and Peter, for sharing your wealth of knowledge and for being great resources to everyone on this webinar. And this is their contact information. If you do want to follow up with a more specific question, here's where you can find them. And again, this information will be shared after the webinar in a follow-up email. Other than that, we want to say thank you so much for being part of this webinar and for wanting to be informed and wanting to learn and letting us share our knowledge and resources with you. We appreciate your time and hope that you learned something new and that you will share this information with your friends and family and your community. So again, thank you. Have a great evening. Stay safe. And this is the end of our webinar.